Chapter 23. For a second there was no reply, and Will felt a dreadful darkness steal into his heart. Then it was instantly dispelled as the bearded ranger rolled over to face him, his right hand clenched over his left forearm, partially stemming the flow of blood. Halt grimaced in pain. "I'm all right," he said through gritted teeth. "That damned bolt only scraped my arm, but it hurts like the very devil." Will went down on one knee beside his master and eased Halt's hand away from the wound. "Let me see," he said. He moved Halt's hand, tentatively at first, afraid that he'd see the jetting, pulsing spurt of blood that would tell him a major artery had been severed. He gave a sigh of relief when he saw there was just a steady welling of blood. Then, reassured, he took his sax knife and cut the ranger's sleeve away from the wound. He studied it for a moment, then reached into the wound pack that every ranger carried on his belt and took out a clean piece of linen, wiping the blood away so he could see the extent of the damage. "He nearly missed you," he said. "A centimetre to the left, and he would have missed you completely." There was a shallow score across the skin of the forearm, about 4 centimetres long, but not deep enough to cut muscles or tendons. Will unstoppered Halt's canteen and flooded the wound with water, wiping with the cloth again and clearing the blood away momentarily. It quickly welled back again, and he shrugged. At least the wound was clean. He applied some salve, took a field dressing from his pack, and wound it around Halt's forearm. "You ruined my jacket," Halt said accusingly, looking at the neatly slit sleeve that now dangled down either side of his arm. Will grinned at him. The grumpy, complaining tone of voice did more than anything else to reassure him that the ranger was only slightly wounded. "You can sew it up tonight," he told him. Halt snorted indignantly. "I'm wounded. You can sew it for me." Then he added, in a more serious tone, "I take it the second one got away. I heard a horse." Will took his right arm and helped him to his feet, although really there was no need to. Halt was only slightly injured after all. But the older ranger recognized that Will's mother henning was a reaction to the worry he'd felt when his teacher had been hit, so he accepted his ministrations without resisting. By the same token, he allowed Will to retrieve his fallen longbow and hand it to him. "Yes," Will said, in answer to the question. "Seems they'd tethered their horses a little further back in the trees. I shot at him, but I missed. I'm sorry, Halt." He was downcast, feeling that he'd let his mentor down. Halt patted him gently on the shoulder. "Can't be helped," he said. "This forest makes accuracy almost impossible. Too many branches and trees in the way." "We made a mistake," Will said, and when Halt raised an eyebrow in an unspoken question, he continued, "We both shot at the same man. That left the other man clear to shoot at you." Halt shrugged. "That couldn't be foreseen. I've told you over and over, something always goes wrong in a fight. There's always something you can't plan for." "I suppose so. It's just—" Will stopped, unable to articulate his thoughts. He sensed that somehow he could have done better, could have saved Halt from the pain of this wound, and the fact that he had come so close to death. Halt put a hand on his shoulder and shook him gently. "Don't worry about it. Look at the result. One of them is dead, and all we have to show for it is a scratch on my arm. I'd say that's a pretty fair outcome, especially when you consider that they started with all the advantages. Wouldn't you?" Will said nothing. He was picturing Halt lying on the forest floor with a crossbow bolt buried in his chest, eyes staring sightlessly up into the stark branches overhead. Halt shook him again, a little more vigorously than before. "Well, wouldn't you?" he repeated, and Will slowly allowed a tired grin to show on his features. I suppose so, he agreed. Halt nodded in satisfaction, although secretly he wished they had managed to kill or capture the second Genovesan as well. Their task would certainly be a lot easier if that had been the case. All right, let's get back and find Horace. He's probably going crazy, wondering what's become of us. Horace was, in fact, on tenterhooks. He had set up a small campsite, but then was too wound up to sit and relax in it. He had paced anxiously up and down, waiting for some sign of his friends, and had actually worn a furrow in the knee-high grass. The 3 horses were less concerned, idly cropping grass around them. Naturally, the rangers caught sight of Horace before he saw them. Even approaching a friendly camp, they tended to move unobtrusively, allowing themselves to blend into the background. Will whistled shrilly. Tug's head shot up instantly, ears pricked, and he whinnied in reply. Horace saw them then, and ran through the grass to meet them. He stopped a few meters short of them, seeing Halt's torn sleeve and the bandage around his arm. "Are you all—" Halt held up a hand to reassure him. "I'm fine. Nothing but a scratch." "Literally," Will added. Now that he was over the initial shock and fear when he had seen his mentor wounded, he could afford to joke about it. Halt looked sidelong at him. "That's a little harsh," he said. "It's actually very painful." "What happened?" Horace interrupted, sensing they might launch into one of those interminable exchanges of banter that rangers seemed so fond of. "Did you get them?" "One of them," Will replied, the smile on his face fading quickly. "The other one got away." "Only one?" Horace said, before he could stop himself. He wasn't used to partial success from the rangers. Then he noticed their expressions and realized that his exclamation might have been a little tactless. "I mean," he amended hastily, "that's excellent. Well done." He paused awkwardly, waiting for a sarcastic reply. He was faintly surprised when none came. The truth was, of course, that both Halt and Will agreed with the sentiment he'd expressed. Both of them wished they had managed a more complete result. And although neither would voice the thought aloud, they both felt they had left the job half done. Horace regarded them for a second or two, puzzled at their non-reaction. Then he gestured for them to come into the campsite, where he had a small fire burning, and the ever-present coffee pot sitting ready by its side. "Sit down," he told them. "I'll make coffee, and you can tell me what happened." They briefly recounted the events among the drowned trees. Neither of them mentioned the moments of dry-mouthed fear as they faced up to an invisible enemy, knowing that the first sign they might have of him was the sudden flash of a crossbow bolt coming at them. Similarly, Will omitted to mention the desperate moments he had spent freeing himself from the Stay With Me vine's thorns. A few more seconds' delay there, he realized, and he might not have arrived in time to save Halt from that first crossbow bolt. He pushed the thought aside. That was the sort of detail that didn't need pondering. "So, what do we do now?" Horace asked, as they sat cross-legged round the small fire, sipping their coffee. "Do you think the survivor will be likely to set up another ambush?" Will and Horace both looked at Halt as he considered the question. "I doubt it," he said at length. "The Genovesans are mercenaries. They fight for money, not for any cause or out of any sense of commitment. And our friend knows that now the odds are stacked against him. If he waits for us again, he might get one of us. But the chances are that the other one will get him. That's not good business. It might suit Tennyson's purpose, but I doubt he'll be able to convince our purple friend that he should give his life for the outsider's cause." He glanced towards the west. Already the sun had dipped well below the tops of the dead trees. Nightfall would be upon them soon. "We'll camp here for the night," he declared. "And tomorrow?" Will asked him. Halt turned and reached behind him for his saddlebag. He winced in discomfort as he stretched his left arm towards them. The wound had dried and stiffened, and the movement set the blood welling again inside the bandage. Horace rose quickly to his feet and fetched the saddlebag for him. "Thanks, Horace," he said. He took his map out of the saddlebag and spread it out before him. "Pity that map doesn't indicate the dead forest," Will said. Halt nodded agreement. "It will after this," he said. "It's actually shown here as Ethelston Forest. Doesn't mention that it's all dead trees. But it does show something that is important to us." Will edged round to see the map more clearly, and Horace knelt on one knee behind Halt, gazing over his shoulder. "I don't think our friend will lie in wait for us again, but I could be wrong. And I was wrong have been the last words of too many careless travellers. So I'm not about to blindly follow him through that forest again. We'll go in further along, say down here about 1 kilometre or so to the west of where we are now, and make our way through from there." "How will we pick up their tracks again?" Will asked. "They could have gone in any direction once they're through the forest." "Could have," Halt said, "but any direction they go, they're hemmed in by the river that caused all this trouble." He indicated the grey trunks, now ghostly in the evening shadows. "No matter where they're heading, they'll have to cross it. And there's only one ford within 15 kilometres. That's where they'll have headed." "True," said Horace with a grin. "Somehow I can't see Tennyson being too keen to swim across a deep river and get himself all soaking wet." "He is a man who enjoys his comforts, isn't he?" Halt agreed dryly. "But that's another reason for us to move west a little before we head into the forest again. Aside from avoiding any further traps set by that purple assassin, it'll bring us out close by the ford." "Where we should pick up their tracks again," Will said, with a sense of satisfaction. "With any luck," Halt agreed. He rolled up the map and replaced it in his saddlebag. "And I think it's time a little luck went our way for a change. The other side seem to be getting the lion's share." "Except for the one who's still in the forest," Will said. Halt nodded. "Yes, except for him. I suppose I'm being ungrateful. We've had our share of good luck today." Which was ironic, in the light of what was to happen the following morning.